I filmed Jim Carrey's return special, but the person on stage wasn't him. It looked like him, sounded like him, but something was wrong. The more I filmed, the more it became clear. The real Jim Carrey was gone. The man in front of me was nothing more than a hollow imitation. And the truth behind it was more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't a comeback. It was a curse, and I was about to get caught in it. The call came at a time when I felt like everything in my career was finally starting to fall into place. The email hit my inbox like a lightning bolt. Jim Carrey is making his comeback. We need you to film the special. I couldn't believe it. It felt like a dream. I'd grown up watching Carrey's movies, studying his comedic timing, memorizing every one of his iconic roles. From Ace Ventura to The Truman Show, his performances were like a force of nature, something untouchable. Now, I was going to be in the room with him, filming the return of a legend. No one could have prepared me for the truth that would follow. When I arrived on set, the first thing that hit me was the atmosphere. It was off. You know that feeling you get when you walk into a room and everything is just a little too quiet, a little too still? That was the vibe I was walking into. The crew was unusually stiff. They barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was always in short, clipped sentences, like they were holding something back. Everyone kept their eyes on the ground, acting like they had better things to do than talk to a newbie. I thought maybe it was just nerves. After all, it was a big project. A legendary comedian returning to the spotlight after years of silence. But as the day went on, I started to notice more things that didn't sit right. The set itself was bizarre, dark, almost suffocating, like they didn't want anyone to feel comfortable. The lights were dimmed in a way that made everything feel like it was happening in a shadowy, half-lit world. No one wanted to be seen too clearly. Then, it was time to meet him. Jim Carrey. I'll admit, I was excited. Beyond excited. I thought I would be starstruck, overwhelmed even. This was the man who made me laugh until my stomach hurt. I was about to film him. But as I walked into the room, ready to meet my idol, something about the air shifted. There he was, Jim Carrey. At least, I thought it was him. He had the same face, the same trademark smile, the same eyes. But the spark wasn't there. There was no unpredictable energy, no erratic humor. Nothing that made Carrey Carrey. When he spoke, it was almost like he was reading from a script. His voice was off, too controlled, too rehearsed. I caught myself wondering, is this real? Is this really Jim Carrey? It didn't feel like it. It felt like I was looking at a shadow of the man I had admired for so long, and that feeling was starting to gnaw at me. I kept telling myself it was just nerves. But this wasn't just nerves. He looked at me, smiled, but there was something in his eyes, a coldness that made my stomach twist. It was almost as if he was looking through me, not at me. He wasn't present. He wasn't here. I tried to shake it off. After all, it was just the first meeting. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But deep down, something was wrong. And I knew that feeling wouldn't go away. I was about to film the greatest comeback in Hollywood history, and yet, something about it already felt doomed. But that wasn't even the worst part. What came next would make me realize how deeply I was already caught in something I couldn't escape. The first time I actually stood face to face with Jim Carrey, I didn't know what to expect. I thought I'd be nervous, overwhelmed, maybe even starstruck, but there was none of that. Instead, There was just a strange, unsettling silence between us. I watched him walk across the stage before he turned to face me. There was something about his presence that didn't feel like the wild, larger-than-life energy I'd seen in countless interviews or on-screen performances. Carrey had always been unpredictable, an electric ball of chaos and charm that seemed to burst through every performance. But here, there was none of that. He was too controlled, too stiff in his movements. It was as if he was consciously holding back. He didn't even say much when we met. Just a quick handshake, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and a few words of pleasantries. But it felt like I was shaking hands with a stranger, not someone I had admired my whole life. I kept trying to figure out what was wrong with him. There was no warmth in his smile, nothing that conveyed the playful, unpredictable side of him that I'd seen for years. The more I looked, the more it became clear that something wasn't right. This was supposed to be the real Jim Carrey, the one coming out of hiding after years of silence. But it wasn't. As the day progressed, I started noticing more oddities. His eyes, they were flat, they were cold, as if they were staring through me, not at me. There was no spark, no playfulness that I had expected. It was like the life behind his gaze had been swallowed up by something darker. I had seen him on TV, had seen him on the big screen, and his eyes were always filled with life, always daring to break the rules. But here, they were empty. I couldn't quite shake that feeling that I was looking at a facade, a mask that had been put on for the cameras. It was like he was trying so hard to be Carrey that he lost the essence of who he was. Then, as the rehearsal began, I started to see how truly off everything was. Carrey was doing his usual impressions, mimicking his iconic characters from Ace Ventura and The Mask. But it wasn't funny. It was uncomfortable. There was no energy, no chaos that made his characters come to life. They felt forced, like he was going through the motions, trying to capture the essence of those characters, but failing miserably. As he did his Ace Ventura bit, I couldn't help but notice how stiff his movements were, like a puppet being jerked around by invisible strings. It wasn't the usual fluid, manic energy that Carrey was known for. This was something else entirely, something unsettling. At one point during the mask routine, he made that signature, exaggerated, wide grin, the kind that used to send me into fits of laughter. But this time, the smile didn't seem genuine. It was too perfect, too forced. It was like he was trying to remind everyone of what they expected, rather than being the real thing. The crew seemed unfazed, as if this was normal. I could see their faces, expressions unreadable, but their eyes never left the monitor. No one seemed to notice what I was seeing. It was like they were all complicit in this bizarre performance. And the more I watched, the more it sank in. This wasn't just a bad performance. It wasn't just a star getting older or out of touch. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. I tried to talk to the other crew members between takes. I wanted to ask them, what's going on? Is this really him? But whenever I tried, they just gave me vague answers or brushed me off. The silence in the room grew heavier, more suffocating. No one was really talking about him, and when they did, it was like they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. That's when I realized it wasn't just me who felt this unease. It was like everyone around me was hiding something. By the time the day was over, I was exhausted. Not from physical work, but from the constant gnawing feeling of dread. The feeling that I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see. The return special wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't supposed to feel like I was watching a mimic, a shadow of the man who had once taken the world by storm. I couldn't let it go. I kept replaying the moments in my mind, trying to piece together what was happening. There was something about his mannerisms, his lack of spontaneity, that bothered me. It was like the person who stood in front of me was trying to be Jim Carrey, but was failing miserably. As the crew packed up, I stayed behind. I couldn't leave. I needed to understand what was happening. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something darker, something bigger at play here than a simple return, something that had a hold of him. And that night, I finally understood. It wasn't just his performance, it was everything. He wasn't just a man. He wasn't even a person anymore. He was a puppet, a shell, and I had a feeling I had just walked into something I couldn't walk away from. But what I discovered next would shatter everything I thought I knew about the special and the man I thought I was filming. The truth was even worse than I could imagine. The day we actually started filming felt different, heavier. The cameras rolled. The lights brightened the stage, and I could feel the tension in the air. I had been part of plenty of shoots before, but this one was something else. It wasn't just the weight of filming a legend's return. It was the feeling that we were all pretending that everything was normal, when deep down, I knew it wasn't. The first few takes went smoothly. The imposter, if that's even what I should call him, did his usual routines. The impressions, the crazy antics, and the exaggerated expressions that were so iconic in Carrey's old films. But it felt like watching someone play dress-up. The audience in the theater laughed, clapped, and cheered, but it wasn't the kind of raw, unfiltered joy that Carrey used to spark. It felt hollow, like everyone was just going through the motions. At first I convinced myself it was just the pressure. Maybe Carrey had been away for so long that it was hard to tap into that spontaneous, chaotic energy that made him such a star. But as the hours passed, I began to notice the cracks. Cracks that ran deeper than a few bad takes. He didn't seem to get tired, and that struck me as odd. There was no fatigue in his eyes. No sign of the physical exhaustion that comes with performing. It was like he was simply going through the motions without any of the usual emotional push. The man I was watching on stage was acting, but not the way Carrey used to. Ooh, it wasn't natural. It was forced, like a machine doing its job. I remember one moment during a scene where he was supposed to improvise. Something went wrong. The audience expected a huge laugh, a crazy one-liner, the kind of spontaneous brilliance Carrey used to deliver. But instead, there was an awkward pause. The imposter froze. He didn't even know what to do. For a full 5 seconds, the stage was dead silent. The crew shifted in their seats, unsure if they should cut the take. But then, in a mechanical motion, he resumed, mimicking the lines as though nothing had happened. I watched the audience closely. They laughed, but it was that nervous laughter, the kind you hear when someone's trying to cover up their discomfort. They didn't know what was happening, but I did. I could see it so clearly now. The man on stage wasn't just missing something. He was missing everything. That moment wasn't just a bad take. It wasn't even a slip. It was something deeper. The real Jim Carrey had always been quick, unpredictable. He thrived on the chaos of the moment. But this was calculated, mechanical, and that terrified me. When we broke for lunch, I couldn't shake the feeling. I stepped outside to clear my head, but the more I walked around the lot, the more I realized I wasn't the only one feeling it. The crew, the cast, everyone, they were all on edge. No one spoke directly about Carrey. They would glance at him, talk in whispers, and then quickly change the subject. It was like there was a silent agreement not to talk about what was happening. I couldn't help it. I went to one of the crew members I'd known for a while, someone I trusted. "Hey," I asked, keeping my voice low. "What's going on? Is everything all right with him?" And it's like something's off. The crew member glanced around nervously before speaking in a hushed tone. "It's not what you think," they said, eyes darting around. "Something happened to Carrey. It's complicated." But before I could press them for more, they shut down the conversation, abruptly walking away. Something had happened to Carrey. Something they weren't willing to talk about. I felt like I was surrounded by people who knew the truth, but no one would say it out loud. As the day went on, I started to watch him more closely. The more I saw, the more I realized how unsettling it was. His reactions, his expressions, they weren't real. His face would remain the same, even when he should have been reacting to something. And when he did smile, it wasn't the wild, contagious smile I had grown up watching. No, it was perfect. Too controlled. It was as though he had studied his past performances until they became robotic. Then came the most chilling moment of the day. As we filmed a scene for The Truman Show, one of his most iconic roles, he stopped. He stood there, staring into the camera, like he was seeing something beyond it. His eyes were glassy, distant. It was as though he had forgotten where he was. I could feel it in my bones. He wasn't even in the moment anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't follow. The crew didn't seem to notice. They just adjusted the lights and kept rolling. The audience, still cheering, was completely unaware of what was happening. But I knew. I was seeing it. I was watching a man slowly disappear in front of me. A man who had already been swallowed by his own persona. After that take, I went back to the monitor, trying to look like everything was fine, but my mind was racing. The unease I felt earlier wasn't just paranoia. It was the beginning of something terrifying. The truth was sinking in, and I was the only one who could see it. This wasn't a special. This wasn't a comeback. This was something much darker. And what came next, what I uncovered, would prove that the nightmare I was walking into was far worse than I could have ever imagined. By now, I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't act like I hadn't seen the cracks, like I hadn't felt the unease creeping in. Something was wrong with Jim Carrey, and I couldn't keep ignoring it. I needed answers. I needed to know what happened to him. After the shoot that night, I stayed behind. The crew was wrapping up, cleaning up the set, but I couldn't just walk away. Not when I had this gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. There was something else going on here. Something far darker than a bad performance, or an actor struggling with his past. I slipped away from the main area, moving toward the back rooms of the studio. The hallways were quiet, too quiet, and the distant hum of the stage lights felt oppressive. I passed the control rooms, the dressing areas, and finally came to a door that seemed to be hidden away. A small office tucked in a corner. The door was slightly ajar, and I noticed a few things scattered on the desk. Paperwork, scripts. But what caught my eye was the old journal lying there. It wasn't in any normal place. It was as though it had been carelessly left behind, like someone wanted it to be found. The cover was worn, faded, and the name written on the front was unmistakable: Jim Carrey. I didn't know what came over me. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe I was simply too far gone to back out now. I picked up the journal and started flipping through the pages. At first it seemed like random thoughts and notes about his early career, his roles, some musings on fame. But then the words started to change. They became more confessional, darker, filled with regret and fear. One entry stood out to me more than the rest. I made a deal. I made a deal to stay relevant. I sold my soul for fame. And now, I don't know who I am anymore. I am Carrey, but I am not Carrey. The real me is gone, lost to the character I created. It's too late. There's no coming back from this. My heart dropped. I felt a wave of cold wash over me as I read those words. I looked around, like someone might be watching me, but the office was empty. The feeling of being watched, though, was something I couldn't shake. The entire studio felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. I kept reading. The entries were increasingly paranoid, almost as if Carrey himself was trying to make sense of something he couldn't explain. There were notes about strange occurrences during his career, shifts in his personality, moments where he felt like he wasn't the same person anymore. But there was one entry that stood out above all the others, a chilling confession. I'm not sure what took over. At first I thought it was just fame, but now I know it's something darker, something old, something that preys on the soul of a person. I'm trapped in a persona, and it wants me gone. I felt the room closing in, around me. This was no longer about a simple actor's struggle with fame. This was something far more terrifying. This wasn't just a man losing himself in his own success. This was about a force, something supernatural that had claimed Jim Carrey. I started to piece it together. The imposter I had been filming wasn't just a bad copy. He was a shadow, an echo of Carrey himself. The more I thought about it, the more pieces fell into place. The way the imposter performed, the lack of real emotion, the way his personality kept flickering between characters. It wasn't a performance, it was a possession. Carrey's soul, or whatever remained of him, was trapped in a body that wasn't his anymore. And the imposter on stage wasn't just mimicking him, he was wearing him, living in his skin, a puppet to whatever force had taken control. I couldn't stop shaking. I had to get out of there. I shoved the journal back into its place, my mind reeling. But before I could leave the room, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I froze. There was no way out now. The door creaked open, and one of the senior crew members stepped in. He didn't look surprised to see me. He already knew. "You shouldn't be in here," he said, his voice flat. "It's not safe." I tried to play it off, but the fear was unmistakable in my voice. "What do you mean? What's going on with him? With Carrey?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. He didn't meet my eyes. "There's no Carrey anymore. Not the way you think. There's only the mask he created. And that mask, it doesn't want to let go. We should have stopped this long ago, but we didn't." I tried to ask more, but he held up his hand, signaling for silence. Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. His warning was clear. There was no going back. I had seen too much. I was now part of something I didn't fully understand, and no one could pull me out of it. The more I tried to make sense of it, the more I realized this curse wasn't just about Carrey. It was about everyone who came into contact with him. And now, it had claimed me too. I left that room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had already become part of the darkness. The truth was slipping away, and with it, my ability to escape. But what happened next would reveal just how deeply this curse had rooted itself, not just in Carrey, but in everyone around him. The nightmare I was caught in was about to get even worse. The days after I uncovered the truth in that journal felt like I was walking through thick fog, every step heavier than the last. The set had become a suffocating place, and each passing moment made it harder to breathe. I couldn't escape the sense that the air itself was thick with something dark, something that was pulling me in deeper by the minute. The imposter's performance only grew more unsettling with each take. It was as if he wasn't just impersonating Carrey's roles anymore. He was losing himself in them. During one scene, he started slipping into a manic version of the Grinch. But this time, the humor was absent. The usual biting sarcasm that would make you laugh twisted into something dark and cruel. It was like he was being driven by a force beyond his control, and I could see it. I could see how it morphed him. At first I thought it was just bad acting, but the more I watched, the more I realized it was something much worse. The imposter wasn't acting like Carrey anymore. He was becoming Carrey's roles, becoming something other than himself. I saw him struggle to hold on to his own identity, flickers of confusion crossing his face as though he couldn't remember who he was outside of the characters he portrayed. Then came a moment I will never forget. During a supposed rehearsal for a scene from The Truman Show, he locked eyes with the camera, and for the first time, there was nothing behind them. It was as though the person I thought was Carrey was gone, replaced by an empty shell. The eyes that had once sparkled with wild humor now looked hollow and unblinking. The audience, of course, didn't see it. They laughed. They cheered. They had no idea that the man in front of them was losing himself with every line, every joke. But I saw it. I could feel it. And I wasn't the only one. The crew, too, began acting strangely. There was an eerie silence on set now, a tension I couldn't ignore. People no longer spoke to me. It wasn't like they were avoiding me, but more like they were deliberately distancing themselves. Their eyes, when they met mine, were full of fear. Fear of what? Fear of knowing but being too terrified to speak. I was the outsider, the one asking too many questions, digging too deep. And then came the whispers. It started one night when I was walking through the hallways. I heard voices, soft at first, almost like the faintest murmur. At first I thought it was my imagination, but the more I tried to ignore them, the louder they got. They were coming from behind closed doors, from rooms I hadn't dared enter. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. The whispers were driving me mad, and I followed them through the dark corridors into the basement of the studio. It was a place no one ever talked about, a part of the set that was always locked. The further I walked, the more the air grew stale, the atmosphere thick with something old and forgotten. The whispers turned into murmurs of dread, terrified voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. That's when I saw it. In the basement, covered in dust and wrapped in tarps, there were old film reels, but not just any reels. These were Carrey's old movies, the ones that had catapulted him to fame, the ones everyone loved. But these weren't the versions we all remembered. The footage on these reels was distorted, warped, like someone had edited them in a way that made everything feel wrong. I pulled one of the reels out, my heart racing, and slipped it into a nearby projector. The moment the footage started, I felt like I was about to lose my mind. What I saw wasn't the Jim Carrey I remembered. It was Carrey, yes, but twisted, distorted. He was still performing, still doing his usual slapstick and improvisations, but his face was wrong. It looked too perfect, too still, like a mask that was about to crack. And when he spoke, when he laughed, it was like there was someone else behind his voice, a darker presence. I couldn't breathe. I had to stop the tape. I had to get out of there. But the reel wouldn't stop spinning. It kept playing, forcing me to watch Carrey's very essence being consumed by something I couldn't understand. I slammed my hand onto the projector, killing the feed, and stumbled backwards. The basement was still now, eerily still. The whispers were gone, and in their place was only silence. But not the peaceful kind of silence, no. This was the kind of silence that came when something had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. I was losing control. The fear that had settled in my chest earlier in the week was now a full-blown panic. I didn't know what was real anymore. I went back to the set, hoping it was just a hallucination, hoping that I could somehow find my way back to normal. But as I walked onto the set, I saw the imposter again. This time, he wasn't in character. He was staring at the mirror, his eyes glazed over, his face pale, as if he had seen something that shattered him. I tried to speak, but my voice didn't make it past my throat. I knew that whatever had consumed Carrey was now consuming me too. I had seen the truth, and there was no going back. But it didn't stop there. The deeper I dug, the more I realized I wasn't just witnessing the collapse of Carrey. I was witnessing my own descent into madness. It wasn't just the feeling of dread anymore. The curse was no longer something I could ignore or convince myself was all in my head. The more I tried to distance myself from the filming, the stronger the pull became. It felt like the very walls of the studio were closing in, like the air around me had become thick and suffocating. No matter how far I walked, no matter how many times I tried to escape the set, I was always pulled back. I was trapped. The imposter, the one who looked like Carrey, was changing, but not in a way that made sense. It was subtle at first, a flicker of a character, a laugh that wasn't quite right, a word out of place, but soon it became clear. He wasn't just playing Carrey's characters anymore. He was becoming them, losing himself entirely in each persona. The Ace Ventura mask he had worn so perfectly the day before started to peel away, and what was left beneath was not Carrey, not even a person. It was like watching a monster take shape. I couldn't stop watching him, though I knew I should have turned away. I couldn't look away. The worst part was seeing how the crew had begun to accept this. They weren't disturbed anymore. They didn't react the way I did. They saw the imposter, this thing in Carrey's skin, and they were numb to it. They moved around him as if nothing was wrong. They laughed, they clapped, and they followed the schedule, as if the spirit of Jim Carrey still walked among them. But I knew better. This wasn't Carrey. This was something else. I wanted to scream, to run out and tell them everything I had seen, everything I had discovered. But I knew they wouldn't believe me. How could they? No one else could see what I was seeing. They were all so deeply absorbed in the production, the facade, that they couldn't perceive the horror creeping through the edges of the set. The imposter's behavior started to take on an unnatural quality. He began repeating himself, Lines, gestures, mannerisms that didn't belong to Carrey at all. It was as if he was stuck on a loop, unable to move forward. His voice had become even more distorted. It didn't sound like Carrey. It sounded like someone mimicking him, but missing the mark. Sometimes, his voice would break into unhinged laughter, and it wasn't the joyous, unpredictable kind that made you laugh. This was cold, manic, like a demon had taken over. I could feel it in my bones. Something was possessing him, and it was far darker than anything I could have imagined. And then, it happened. I was behind the scenes prepping for the next scene when I saw him again. This time, he wasn't just playing a role. He wasn't just performing as Carrey's characters. He was staring into the mirror, his eyes wide open, unblinking. I approached him trying to get his attention. No reaction. It was like I wasn't even there. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't an actor playing a part. This wasn't Carrey slipping into his famous roles. This was something else. The imposter's mind was shattering, and in its place was something inhuman, something that wasn't Carrey at all. The more I tried to pull him out of his stupor, the more I realized there was no Carrey left. The curse had already claimed him, and now it was trying to claim me, too. I couldn't leave. The doors were locked. The walls seemed to stretch further away as though they were closing in on me, like I was trapped inside a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every corner I turned, I could feel it. The weight of the curse, pulling me back toward the set, pulling me deeper into the web I couldn't escape. I tried to speak to the crew again, tried to tell them what was happening, but it was as if they were all in a trance. They looked right through me, as if I wasn't even speaking. I could see the fear in their eyes, but they refused to acknowledge it. None of them could see the truth, and that made me feel even more isolated. I was the only one who knew what was happening. And what was worse, I was becoming part of it too. The more I stayed, the more I became immersed in the curse, the more I realized I wasn't just watching the destruction of Carrey. I was losing myself. My identity was beginning to blur. The lines between what was real and what wasn't starting to melt away. The darkness was claiming me too. But the worst part hadn't even happened yet. The curse was about to break free, and I had no idea how to stop it. It all came crashing down the night I finally confronted him. I had to. There was no other choice. The walls had been closing in for days, and the suffocating sense of dread had grown unbearable. Every day, the imposter got worse, more out of control. It wasn't just the performances anymore. It was his presence, his being. He was losing it. And so was I. I waited until the set was empty, the crew and cast trickling out for the night. When I finally saw him standing alone in the corner of the stage, bathed in an eerie spotlight, I knew it was time. I had to face whatever it was that had taken Carrey, or whatever had become him. He wasn't just a man anymore. He wasn't even an actor. He was something far darker. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but the words felt like they were coming from someone else. It wasn't me asking anymore. It was a terrified soul screaming for answers. He turned to face me, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of the real Carrey. His eyes, the familiar spark. But then, it was gone. The moment vanished, replaced by a cold void, an absence that chilled me to the bone. "I'm nothing," he said, his voice empty, hollow. It was strange, so strange to hear the words come from his mouth. This wasn't a joke or a playful quip. It was like a confession. I was nothing before, And now, I'm even less. I didn't understand. What was happening to him? What had happened to the real Carrey? But I had a feeling I already knew the answer. Something had taken his soul. And this thing in front of me was the result. You're not him, I said, taking a step forward. You're just wearing his skin. You're not the real Jim Carrey. You never were. He smiled then, but it wasn't the Carrey smile I had grown up watching. It was twisted, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled one too many times. I'm becoming him, he whispered, his voice trembling. I have no choice. The more I act, the more I perform, the more it pulls me in. I can't escape it, and neither can you. The words hit me like a slap to the face. I stepped back, my heart racing. It wasn't just him. It wasn't just Carrey who had been consumed. The curse was consuming all of us. The realization sank in like a lead weight. I wasn't just watching the destruction of Carrey. I was part of it. The moment I had signed up to film his return, I had sealed my own fate. This wasn't a comeback. This was a cycle, a never-ending loop of despair, where everyone involved would be devoured by the curse that had taken him. The imposter stepped closer, his eyes no longer vacant but filled with an unsettling, frenzied energy. You should have never come here, he said, his grin widening, revealing something more monstrous behind the smile. You should have turned away. But now, it's too late. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, staring into his eyes, and for the first time, I understood what had happened. The real Carrey was gone, trapped inside the endless cycle of fame, locked away by a dark deal he had made long ago. And this thing was all that was left. The air around me seemed to thicken, the studio lights flickering as if they were struggling to stay on. I could feel the curse wrapping around me, tightening, dragging me further into the abyss. Every step I had taken closer to him had only brought me deeper into this nightmare. And now, there was no escape. I tried to move, tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey me. I was caught, and I knew it. The curse had me, just like it had Carrey. Just like it had taken everyone else. You're part of this now, he said, his voice softer, almost pitying. You can't run from it. The mask is already on you, and you'll wear it forever. I didn't know how long we stood there, locked in that moment. The reality of what he was saying settled in like a suffocating weight. This wasn't just a story about Jim Carrey's fall from grace. This was about the curse that consumed him, and now it was consuming me. We were all just pawns in this twisted game, caught in a never-ending loop where nothing was real. And then, like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place, I understood. The special wasn't just about a comeback. It was about something far darker, something that had been waiting all along. The lights flickered once more, and when they came back on, the studio was empty. It was gone. The set was empty. The cameras, motionless. I was the only one left. But there was one last thing I had to see. One final truth that would shatter everything. The curse had only just begun. The special aired, and the world thought they were witnessing Jim Carrey's grand return. But what they saw wasn't him. It was never him. The imposter had become Carrey, but the real Carrey was long gone, trapped by a dark, ancient curse that fed on his fame, his identity. And now, the curse has claimed me too. I've tried to escape, but it's no use. I'm caught in the same endless loop. The face of Carrey still haunts me, his laughter, his smile, his essence all twisted and distorted. But there's no way out. The curse has taken hold of me, I'm now part of the spectacle, part of the performance forever, and no one else can see it. They all still think it's a comeback. They all still think it's the real Jim Carrey. But I know the real Carrey is gone, and what's left is something far worse.